I'm now at Revising Reality, the second section of this third lecture of the Michael Herr lectures. And I want to connect what we see in the Siege of Quezon with what Herr has talked about in terms of information control, which I made reference to in the first lecture. And I showed you the 5 o'clock follies clip. Although the press had remarkable access to the country, and as I say, I don't see that happening again, really ever. Yeah, I'll stand by that. I'm just thinking about all the sort of different, no. The deal that was formed during World War II, the agreement, the unspoken agreement between newspapers, the media, and the American powers that be, which mean the government, the military, which is supposed to be, subordinate to the government, and so on. The understanding that the press would essentially just take that position and forward it on their own. The propaganda was relatively unnecessary, is the argument, basically. Vietnam put an end to all of that. But anyway, part of the argument goes that the press still allowed the military to dictate the story, and this is what Herr is talking about when he says, they wanted Ambassador Cromer's story, and they got it, and you got it, because that's you get the official version. So this is a reference then, and then there is this reference to the so-called 5 o'clock follies, when there was this, which where every day there was this briefing at 5 o'clock, and as I say, I showed you footage of it, and here's the reference to Herr on page 99, and he says you would see copies of Dien Bien Phu, the book, it's a history, at the Continental Hotel, and in the big briefing room at Justpo in Saigon, which is one of the military information sessions, basically, where every afternoon at 4:45, spokesmen conducted the daily war briefing, which is colloquially referred to as the 5 o'clock follies, and Orwellian groped through the day's events as seen by the mission, capital M. And the mission here is the military mission. It's not a religious mission. It's the mission as designed by, what's on mission today. What's the position? So this is page 99. Still, the most powerful discussion, really, of how to use language to bend it around is to be found in George Orwell's famous essay, which is really very readable, called Politics in the English Language, which was written in 1946. This is the foundation for 1984, his novel, which gets a lot more attention than the essays do. Orwell was a famous essayist, and if you want to read one of the most important pieces of journalistic essayism, you would read Politics in the English Language. It's short, and basically he talks about it's the material that becomes the discussion of newspeak, and how euphemism operates, especially during wartime or during a time of crisis. So I do recommend that. You can see it free online, and it's a lot shorter than 1984, which has a lot of emotional clout, but also has these very long passages in it, which are, I don't know, might put you off. Orwell points to the ways in which the simple control of language, clarity, and understanding audience allow the author to construct history the way the author chooses. And so Orwell is right on he's right. That is, he's right. I don't mean he's correct, although I think he is correct, and many people would agree. We're talking about millions of people would agree with us, that because of his experiences in the Spanish Civil War and watching the fascists begin to manipulate information, and then during World War II, as he begins to watch English socialism, which is what INGSOC is, basically butcher up the truth and try to make sense of Stalinism and where when a lot of communists broke from the party and said, no, we didn't sign up for this. One of the things that Orwell does is focus specifically on how does language come to be used to change the visions in your head, and how is it possible to go on fighting a war because you're using the right language? And he would say yes. So it's a very legitimate argument to make that language had a great deal to do with the permission, the ongoing permission given by the presidential office, the office of the president, by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by Senate, and to a lesser extent by Congress, to go on fighting the war. And Herr says about these things that they usually did the same thing to your perception of the war that flares did to your night vision. So this is on page 149. If you think about this in terms of fireworks, we've all been to fireworks shows, and you get out to a fireworks exhibit and you're waiting, because you got there ahead of time to get a decent spot and all that, and you're sitting around waiting, and it gets darker and darker, and then finally it's like 10 o'clock or it's midnight or whatever, and they start letting off the fireworks, and the fireworks boom, and they're great, they're fun, and you have these after impressions because the lights are so bright and your eyes are adjusted to the darkness because they're loaded with visual purple, this particular chemical that loads up on the optic nerve. And so when the lights go off, they're very bright and they really boom, and they're just, the greens are so, neon green, and the yellows, wow, the reds are amazing. And then you close your eyes and you see the spots of flashes of things, that are, because your eyes are actually, the chemicals in your eyes are essentially handling and processing the colors, and they're producing, and you can sort of see this, they're producing the opposite, the complement of the color in your eyes, right? So this is amazing light show that goes on after you're watching. And the other thing about having watched these fireworks is that when you then look down, you can't really see anything because your eyes don't know what to do. I mean, they've been adjusted for the darkness, so the retinas or the pupils are dilated, right? They're hugely open because they're trying to get all the light they can. And then they've had the fireworks, so they got to close. But then it's dark, so they open. They're like, oh. So your eyes are doing these crazy things. And your job at this point, after you've seen the fireworks, is to get into your car and leave, or, and you're walking away. You can barely see where the ground is because you're like, oh, you're blinded, right? Well, this is Herr's metaphor for how this kind of information affects your mind. That basically, this information that's being given to you by the military blows your vision, and it just blasts your vision out, so you can't see anything properly. So when you go out into the field, you're struck by, you've been told, this is what's happening, but then there's this different reality out in the field, and the two couldn't be more different. Like none of it meshes. They aren't the same at all. And so there's this terrible collision in your head that's going on. So this is, as he says, the war that did, their perception of the war that flares did to night vision. So that's the parallel. And again, this scene, the kind of thing is illustrated best in Apocalypse Now, when the boat arrives at the Dolong Bridge, and Roach, who is this genius with the blooper, which is an M79 grenade launcher, is able to kill somebody just by hearing where they are. It's a spooky scene, and it comes straight out of Dispatches. This is what happens. That scene with Roach, where there's a guy caught on the wire, and he's yelling "Fuck you, GI," and this guy comes over and he just gets his gun, and he's like, they're like, "Do you want a flare?" He's like, "No." And but they pop up these incredible flares when they arrive. The Dolong Bridge sort of looks like this vision of hell, I guess. So Herr points out the press had to be smart because the military is excellent at controlling information. And this was the 60s. This is not now. I mean, by now, at the time, the people who were sort of working in military information control probably had some schooling. Now they have master's degrees in marketing, and they have experience in marketing, you know, so they know exactly what they're doing. So they're not, and they've taken psychology courses, they have psychology degrees, you know, they've done, they know how focus groups operate, they know, you know. But this is the early days, right? 50 years ago. So so the way the military knows it's controlling information, on page 144, he says, Colonel David Lowndes was a deceptively complicated man with a gift, as one of his staff members put it, for jerking off the press. So, you know, he just knows how to go there and get the press to leave him alone. Like, he knows how to give them enough stuff to make them happy. And so they have a nice information orgasm, and then they go away, you know, they leave them alone. The story was trickier than that, because Vietnam looks nothing like World War II with these enormous set piece battles, or for that matter, like Korea. And the siege of Khe Sanh is attractive because it looks like a World War II story. It's like, oh, we got our guys here and they're there and they're bad and we're good, and, you know, end of story. This is a nice, simple story, instead of trying to sell like what's going on in Vietnam. In the same way that, if you think about it, it's like if somebody says to you, well, what's going on in, you know, between Israel and Palestine? You're like, well, I see in 19, it's like, you know, how many years have you got to go through? Like, what might have actually, you know, what version of events has happened there? By then, Khe Sanh was famous, says Herr, one of the few place names in Vietnam that was recognized by the American public because it lasted so long. Khe Sanh said siege, and it said encircled Marines and heroic defenders. It could be understood by newspaper readers quickly. It breathed glory and war and honored dead. It seemed to make sense. It was good stuff on 105. So this is the kind of reality that you're looking for, and that they just didn't get. So it's a very interesting sort of picture of like what the Americans hoped the war would look like, but it just didn't.